Brian Simpson's latest comedy special, live from the Mothership. This is the first full special that I've seen of Brian Simpson's. I saw another, I think it was a half hour, or maybe it was one of those 15-minute ones where it was like so-and-so presents, like Bill Burr presents, or Dave Chappelle presents, Tiffany Haddish presents, and then there's a slew of comics that they put on and use their cachet or leverage or actual money that Netflix gave to them to push out comics that they want to put on. It was one of those, if I'm not mistaken. I just don't remember if it was a 15-minute or a half hour. But I saw his portion of that special, which was hilarious and has one of my all-time favorite jokes in it, just because of the clever writing and metaphor and wordplay in it, which I'll circle back to in a bit. But this latest one, live from the Mothership, is his first full hour special that I've seen. I don't know if it's his first actual hour, but it's definitely the first one that I've seen. And I was put on to Brian Simpson via podcasts, which is how I'm put on to most comedians that I find out about or that I'm into. He's done You Might Be Drunk with Mark Normand and Sam Morril. He's done Stabby's World. He's done Rogan. And since I'm so into podcasts and I listen to so many different types, podcasts are usually the doorway for me into new content or new people creating content. So I'm into stand-up comedy, but I don't, randomly scroll through Netflix for different comedy specials, for example. But if I hear a comic on a podcast I had never heard of before, which has happened countless times, and I'm into their perspective on things, get to know a little bit more of who they are, where they come from, so on and so forth, and I like them, then I'm, maybe I'll like their content. Let me check it out. And then I'll start watching their specials and stuff like that. Same thing with music. I'm usually not into who's the latest, who's who. Like anybody that knows me knows that I still have the Eminem Show, Stillmatic, Blueprint, and Gabendura's We Broke the Rules on repeat. But when I hear of an artist or I see an interview, I watch an interview on Matt Hoffa or on Vlad or Rory Amal or Joe Budden, or even Breakfast Club sometimes, I'm like, oh, this artist seems cool. Let me check them out. That's how I got into Russ and Joyner Lucas. But I digress. Point is, that's how I found this comic, Brian Simpson. And like I mentioned in the intro, it's the first special filmed at Joe Rogan's new comedy club, which is the Mothership. And I guess it's not so new anymore. It's been open for over a year now. And something interesting about Rogan's club that I've heard, comics opine on and stuff during different pods, is that he set it up so that every set of every comic that works out there or does shows or whatever can be recorded. He's always been a proponent of that for younger comics. Like advice that he would give them is, record yourself visually if you can. Hire a camera guy just to film your sets so you can rewatch them back and then, see things that you did right, see things that you did wrong, and improve on them. And if that's not feasible, definitely, just on your iPhone, on the recorder, press record, put it down so you can listen to things back. Because when comics perform sets, a lot of it, or most of it, or, depending on the comic, but a lot of it is prepared, written, and sprinkled throughout is off the cuff stuff. And bits that materialize just creatively based on how the set is going, some sort of crowd reaction, a different mental pathway the comic decided to go off creatively for whatever reason, and that's called writing on stage. And his advice is always that, moments like that, sometimes you forget what it was exactly that set you off in that path and what it was that made a certain bit work, so on and so forth. So all sets are recorded for each of them to have if they want it. What I never knew or gotten clarification on is if it's all video recorded sets or if it's all audio. I'll be interested to know if it is video recorded, if that same mechanism was how the special itself was shot. I know there's usually 3 or 5 or, depending on who special it is and how they want to shoot it. There's a lot of different cameras and a bunch, I'm sure, that I'm definitely not aware of going on in terms of shooting a special and the aesthetics for it and stuff like that. But it would be dope if it's already preset for special shooting and everything, you know what I mean? Built into it. It'll make the allure of that club and filming at that club even higher than it already is. Because comics definitely seem to love it in terms of like the aesthetics and the way it's built and the low ceilings. And you'd obviously have to be a comic to understand the nuances of it, which I am not. But based on all the comics that I listen to, all of which have only said positive things about it, they always say how you can tell the club was built by a comic for comics. So I definitely would be interested to know more about that camera setup there. But anyway, I digress. The hilarious joke that I love from his 15-minute or half-hour special, and I'm going to paraphrase it and also preface it by saying that Brian Simpson is black, so this isn't a racist bit or anything like that. I just wanted to add that context just in case. And I just love the clever metaphor of it. And again, I'm going to paraphrase it, but he says something along the lines of that black people are pennies. And he says, legally they're accepted everywhere, but once you see 4 or 5 of those motherfuckers together, you kind of raise an eyebrow. And he does it with, he's not a very physical comic, but just his facial mannerisms while saying that joke, it just always stuck with me, and I just thought it was super hilarious. But yeah, it's one of my favorite jokes. But going back to this special specifically, I thought it started off slower than I was expecting. He has a very, not monotone, but very laid back, kind of speaks like he's high, slow build type of delivery. But just the first few jokes or bits weren't hitting for me. Not enough to, not the special or anything like that. I just thought there was a hockey stick incline around, after you're a quarter into the special. And then it just kept getting better from there, which I guess is good for retention purposes. And again, it's just my opinion, right? Some other folks, I'm sure, other jokes in the beginning resonated more with them, but here are a few that I thought were great. He had this whole mass shooter chunk, gun rights and stuff like that. And he says that he had this theory that should be verified, and if verified, then this should be implemented. So he says that all mass shooters, they go into schools and supermarkets and so forth, that all of them must have small dicks. And he says that if proven to be true, then all men's dick sizes should be added to their driver's licenses. And that this alone, this historic piece of legislation, of hypothetical legislation, would substantially drop the occurrence of these mass shootings in this country. If a dude is pissed off and goes into a gun store and the clerk there, grabs his ID and, sees the guy's frustrated and stuff like that, and he's asking for an AR-15, the guy could look at his ID and say, sorry, sir, you don't have the girth for an AR-15, but I can offer you this high-end slingshot. I just thought that was fucking hilarious. I'm sorry. Then he has this COVID joke. He has a chunk about COVID. A specific piece of it that I thought was so true was when he says that the only difference between liberals and conservatives in relation to COVID is how long we gave a fuck about COVID for. Then he plays with that for a while, saying, conservatives were over it after like 2 weeks, just OD. And liberals were over it after, 2 years, which is also OD, on the opposite side of that spectrum. And he was like, but ultimately, we all arrived at the same conclusion. Grandma needs to stay her ass at home. That's it. And the moral was, don't let these politicians rile you up against each other, as they love to do with everything and anything under the sun, which is the game that they're playing, right? Controversial issues and identity politics and fear-mongering and this and that. Whatever they can do or say to sway what they want, which is you vote. And then he tagged that bit up with highlighting that dumb people in any situation always start talking first. That's why we get the conspiracies that like 5G caused COVID or all the other random things that we heard the first few weeks when nobody knew anything of what was going on. And he says, stupid is instant and science takes time. That was definitely a good takeaway. Now, my favorite bit or full chunk of the whole special, I won't completely spoiler alert it for you guys, but I do need to highlight a couple points from it because I thought it was just masterfully done and it was fucking hilarious. He goes in on Queen Elizabeth and how he's happy that she died and she was a piece of shit, so on and so forth. Reverse engineers how she became Queen Elizabeth. all while threading in that there are different levels of how good a woman's pussy is. There's a WAP scale, a WAP 1, WAP 2, WAP 3, so on and so forth. And in the special, for the uninitiated, he describes what WAP is. And the way he wove those two stories together was amazing. I thought was fucking hilarious. And I think this story is true, but I haven't looked too much into it because I kind of want it to be true for the bit. But the bit itself is hilarious standalone anyway. But he mentions a woman, an American woman, who was married to a pilot. And at the time when, you know, pilots were a big thing, it was like, wow, he's a pilot. And how that woman divorced the pilot and married a millionaire back when that was the highest you can be. Like, billionaires didn't exist. And that same woman then divorced that millionaire and started messing with King Edward of England. And he describes how the King of England at the time, not sure how it is now, is also the head of the church. And since the Christian church doesn't allow for, or didn't at the time, I think they do now, doesn't, you know, believe in divorce or anything like that, it's, you know, till death do you part, King Edward couldn't officially marry this woman that he was with. So he decided for this woman to vacate his throne. And ultimately it went to his younger brother, who he described as being a cokehead that also had a speech impediment and was completely overwhelmed by the task of being king. And he wound up dying 10 months later. So then the throne defaulted to his teenage daughter at the time, who was Queen Elizabeth. And that's how we got, as he says, stuck with that bitch for like 90 million years or whatever it was. Oh my God, I thought that was hilarious. How sick is that story? And then the last thing I'll say about the special is he has this ending bit about how every guy in the world is at least 5% gay, and describes it as it not being a switch, like an on and off switch. It's more like a dimmer switch. You know, there's a spectrum of gay, and he proves it, in his opinion, in a couple of ways by saying things like how every man loved, you know, the decades-long Marvel Universe movies, you know, Captain America's and Avengers, so on and so forth. And he was like, the whole decade prior, the opinions of so many men would have changed if at the end, instead of Thanos snapping his finger with the glove on the way he did, if he would have done it gaily, like, you know, a round snap going, hey. And then he proves his theory of every man being at least 5% gay by using a proxy that I'm not going to give up because I want you guys to go watch the special, but using a proxy that, if true, if accurate, if it really meant that, and I'm not saying that it does, no Diddy, right? But if this proxy that he uses really meant that, then we absolutely are all at least 5% gay. And I'll leave it there. Brian Simpson's Live from the Mothership. The special is streaming now on Netflix. Check it out.